there is another dimension, beyond that which is knowledge of man. It is a dimension as vast as space, and as limitless as infinity. It is a blackness between the sun and the moon, between science and superstition, and it lies between all of man's fears and the summit of his ability. This is the space of imagination. It is an area which we call the Sci-Fi Zone. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sci-Fi Zone. And tonight, I have some hot garbage for you. And I am talking about the 2020 Sci-Fi Snooze Fest that is Space, directed by Monte Light. Look, I did probably use some clickbait for this, but I have a very strong argument to make, and I think it is warranted. This is some hot garbage. The year is 2050. Dr. Ada Gray and her fellow astronauts are aboard the space called Udo. They must fight for survival after an accident leaves them stranded in deep space. Look, I know this sounds interesting. I did also see that Len Kaminski's name is in the cast, and I got a little excited. I will admit, I did. But it turns out he's only in a small cameo, which was clearly filmed remote. I watched this movie about 2 months ago. It's been quite a while, and I'm only getting around to reviewing it now. I felt in order to do this movie justice, I had to sit with it a while. I just had to sit and live with it. I want a preference. The acting was not all that bad. The writing, although, well, that's a whole nother story. Let's dive into it a little bit and explore this movie. The movie opens with Dr. Ada Gray doing some kind of remote Q&A YouTube style thing. This leads to an introduction to the space crew. Interesting enough, they appear to be on a little retreat in the desert. Strange, one might say. But if I only knew what I know now, I would have cherished every moment of these scenes in the desert. Because this shit gets bad. It gets real bad. And fast. I mean, all of this intro is bad. But it's not like unbearable yet. I do realize not everyone has such a high tolerance for bad movies like myself. But this is a hard one. Even for me, this was a hard one. This Q&A style thing goes on for about 10 minutes. It feels like 30 because it's so boring and nonsensical from this one camera angle. When we finally get into space, we see a very small, fun, homemade set design for the crew. And believe me, I'm not knocking on the set, but would you be surprised if I told you we spent the next hour and 15 trapped inside it? We do have some interesting characters. Kurt Quinn plays a very convincing Frenchman, for instance, which I thought was pretty cool, and probably took him a lot of time to practice and get a role for that. This guy Mitch plays the asshole, mainly because every chance he gets, he tries to fuck with Dr. Ada. So, I think I should mention, pretty much every angle and camera is shot from the same one perspective inside this ship. I think they were trying to make a run with this kind of fly-on-the-wall style of filmmaking. But it gets old fairly quickly. Again, realizing that another 10 minutes into this, nothing really happens that pushes a coherent story forward. We have scene after scene of random space jargon. A lot of this is filled with characters talking into video feeds of loved ones back home. This literally is what the bulk of the film is. So strap in, everyone. Now, I believe there are about 2 or 3 establishing shots that are used throughout this movie of the ship. They are fresh of breath air when they grace the screen. I think it is safe to say they are the best part of this movie, because they give you a break from the terrible story of nothing. I was literally celebrating when I had an exterior view of the ship on my screen, because it was such a relief, such a relief. After what feels like an eternity, mind you, if you're lucky enough to have made it this far into the movie, I feel like honestly though, most probably did not. They should just give you an award, frankly, if you made it this far. Fuck. We finally arrive at the third act. Up to this point, the bulk of the movie, nothing has happened of interest. We're in this one room, talking to characters, talking to each other about nonsensical things. It's rough. So in the third act, which people claim online to be the best part of the movie, I don't really agree with that sentiment, but to each their own. We reach the ship. And there's a ship afloat in space. They try to hail the ship, but things go south pretty quickly. This is where it gets interesting. Because one, you don't really understand why things are going south. We get about 10 minutes of the crew trying to speak Japanese to the ship, which was something. Interesting choices were made for sure. The mystery ship, as we'll call it, is venting some kind of gas. Our crew gets a little scared, so they decide to maneuver and push themselves a little farther away from this mystery ship. And this is riveting because something is actually finally happening in this movie. All of a sudden, the ship takes some kind of hit. People start screaming and yelling. What is going on? How is this happening? Interesting enough, we don't really have any exterior shots after this point too much to really know what is happening. It's a little confusing. So this word comes up, nanites. Nanites are to blame. Yeah, pressure valve goes. So what I can gather is some kind of evil entity with these nanites that are attacking them, I guess. So what really escapes me going forward is there seems to be some kind of jump in time. All of a sudden our characters are in these escape pods, and there's not really a sense of how or when that happened. They just kind of wake up in them. I don't even believe there's an exterior shot of this, so I was confused if they were still on the ship, were they attached to the ship, were the escape pods floating in space? Who the fuck knows? No one knows. No one knows anything in this movie. But this is where the movie gets even more claustrophobic, because we are now forced to watch each character from this angle in a pod. It's brutal. I'm not gonna lie to you, it is brutal. I would not wish this viewing experience on my worst enemy. And that's some truth right there. We do get this kind of Hollywood style of square edit on this screen, which was kind of So the rest of the movie is literally just this. Cutting back and forth from one pod to another. The crew's trying to come up with a plan. They're floating in space. They want to save their lives. Luckily, the doctor comes up with a brilliant plan to tether the ships together using the nanite technology, because somehow she apparently has a little vial of it. I don't understand all this nanite talk and why this has to be in the movie. But she comes up with this brilliant plan to tether the pods with some kind of nanites. And then slowly everyone starts to die. By these nanites. Nanites. The whole thing is really just a head scratcher of a story. I just have a lot of questions. This whole section is just another snooze fest. Talking heads into the camera like I'm doing now for the rest of the movie. It is rough. And it just goes on for what seems like forever. Plus, maybe the one plus of the movie, everything's pretty sharp and somewhat lit well. You have in these stayed on shots in the pods, we have a key light and a little gel. It's mostly sharp. There are times when they're on the ship and people fall out of focus, which is kind of weird, but that did happen, so that was a little bit annoying when that would grace the screen. It's just so hard because so much of this movie is just like into the camera narrative dumps. The whole movie is just narrative dump after narrative dump. Would I recommend this? Not a chance in hell. I would not recommend this. Don't watch this in a group, don't watch it by yourself. In fact, just forget you watched this video altogether because it's just gonna be a better life for you if you do. Right, if we learned anything, we don't need to add more stress to ourselves. Yeah, this might be one of the worst science fiction films I've ever seen. Truly. And I have seen a lot of bad science fiction movies in my time. You better believe it. One could argue that this movie is possibly too realistic to what would happen like if you were an astronaut in space. Floating around in small spaces, you had your one camera you can communicate to occasionally. A lot of nothing happens and a lot of time is just spent floating around. So in that sense, it's pretty realistic to an experience in space. At the end, we do get this nude makeout scene. And I guess it's an attempt to make up for the hour and 20 minutes that you just watched that you're never gonna get back. And I just don't think it's worth holding out for this one moment, honestly. Yeah, this movie really is so boring and so hard to watch. You have to be really dedicated to watch this movie. I just can't imagine. I don't understand the point of making a science fiction movie in space about nothing, and the majority of the movie is just characters stuck in this one room talking to each other about nonsensical things and then talking to loved ones on video camera. I guess it's supposed to help build the characters, but it's like the whole movie. And it's just not interesting. It was so hard to watch these scenes because it just goes on and on and on and on. And it was brutal. It was so brutal. And I think that's why I had such a hard time. I didn't even know if I was going to review this movie. It was so brutal, honestly. And I'm finally getting around to it. I sat on it for a bit. And I guess I just had to do it to like warn people. Like, don't watch it. You know, avoid at all costs, please. It's a rough movie. It's a real rough movie. I want to find some good science fiction. I really hope whatever I have next is not this bad, because I don't think I can keep doing this otherwise. Like, this was so bad. So bad. Ah.